Ever sit in the back of a courtroom and feel like the only real thing in the whole place is the sunlight drifting through the windows, like it's the only thing not pretending? That's how it felt that morning. The old courthouse smelled like dust and lemon polish, the air thick with silence and slow movements. Everything creaked and groaned like the building itself was tired, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something it knew wouldn't come. I was there. Clara Jenkins, 58 years old, sitting on a splintered wooden pew that had held too many stories and not enough justice. My hands folded in my lap, my posture still as stone. No earrings, no watch, just a worn gold ring that had molded itself into my skin over the years. I didn't need much. I just needed to see him. Mason Whitaker, sitting at the defendant's table like a ghost half-turned human, staring at nothing. He didn't look back at me, but that was all right. I'd looked at him enough for both of us. They say a courtroom strips people bare, shows who they really are. You see it in the fidgeting fingers of anxious families, in the cold certainty of a judge whose voice sounds like gravel and thunder, in the slick shoes and smooth lies of lawyers paid to care. When the judge read out Mason's name, Whitaker, it felt like the last word in a story nobody ever wanted to write, let alone read. The benches creaked as folks shifted, waiting for something, a breakdown, a gasp, maybe a tear. But not from me, not today. Funny thing is, most people didn't even notice me when I walked in. At security, the guard glanced up and asked who I was there for. I just said, "I'm here for him," and kept my hand wrapped around the edge of an old photograph in my purse. A photo I never had the courage to pull out unless the ache got too big to carry quiet. Mason's 28 now, but in my mind he's still that 11-year-old boy, skinny, quiet, all sharp elbows and guarded eyes. The kind of child who flinched at his own shadow and slept with crackers under his pillow like the hunger might sneak back while he dreamed. The caseworker warned me when he arrived, "Don't expect him to connect." I didn't. I just made pancakes every Saturday. Folded his shirts with extra care, sat with him when storms shook the windows and sang under my breath like that could keep the thunder out. I didn't push, I just stayed. One day he called me Ma, soft, barely there, but it was everything. On his 12th birthday, he handed me a card cut from magazine scraps. "You didn't give me life, but you gave me one." You ever read something like that and not cry? I couldn't. But life doesn't hold still for happy endings. Not for long. Just a few weeks later, some distant cousin, family by blood, not bond, filed for custody. The agency called it in the child's best interest. I called it loss. I wasn't even allowed to say goodbye. I wrote him letters, left voicemails that were never returned. But the system doesn't make space for tired women with casseroles and cracked voices. And just like that, he was gone. The house felt hollow for years. So sitting there across the courtroom from him after all that time, I kept wondering, does he remember the smell of cinnamon in my kitchen? The way I hummed through storms? The warm light in the hallway when he couldn't sleep? Maybe not. But I did. I always did. The lawyers kept talking, reading out facts like they were pieces of someone else's life. A recess was called. People whispered, glanced my way like they weren't sure if I was lost or just misplaced. One young attorney even walked over and asked softly, "Are you lost, ma'am?" I smiled, not unkindly, and said, "No, I'm exactly where I need to be." She looked startled, maybe even a little ashamed, and walked away. It didn't bother me. You learn how to be invisible after a while. Then came the moment. The judge looked down and asked Mason if he had anything to say before sentencing. For a long time, he didn't move. I thought maybe he wouldn't speak at all. But then he stood. His voice was rough, deeper, worn down by years I hadn't witnessed. But underneath, I heard the same quiet ache that used to sit across my kitchen table. "I've done a lot wrong," he said, voice steady but shaking underneath. "And I spent a long time being angry at people who left." He paused, looked straight at me for the first time in years. "But when I was a kid, there was this woman. She made pancakes every Saturday. She sat with me during storms. She called me baby, even when I didn't deserve it. That meant home. That meant safe. You could feel the room shift, all those heads turning, eyes scanning, trying to find the woman behind the story. My hand trembled, but I held it still. I wasn't going to take that moment from him. And then he said, "If she's still willing to be my mom, I need her now." And that was when the judge finally looked at me, really looked, like he saw not just a woman on a bench, but a whole story, beginning to end, sitting right there in the sunlight. It got under my skin, the way his voice wavered as he said, "S. Jenkins, Clara Jenkins." And then something I never saw coming happened. The judge recognized me. He actually remembered. "You're the woman who got Lily to speak again," he said, and for a moment the courtroom forgot itself, his own niece all those years ago. I remembered her clear as day, a tiny, frightened girl clinging to a pink elephant, barely whispering a word. I had sung to her like I did for Mason, lullabies softer than the noise in her heart. And just like that, the courtroom wasn't about crime or punishment anymore. It was about something else, something fragile. The air changed. Nobody cared about verdicts or sentencing for a moment, just the reminder that broken things can heal. Judge Rose's voice softened as he looked right at me. "There are people in this world who stitch together the broken pieces of others," he said, "and ask nothing in return. Ms. Jenkins, you're one of those people." I felt the tears slip down my cheek, and I didn't hide them. For the first time, that old courtroom built for judgment felt like it was holding something sacred, something like grace. When the judge finally read the sentence, his voice steady and sure, there was no prison time for Mason. Just rehabilitation, community service, mentoring other kids who, like him, once needed more than the world gave them. He looked at me again and said, "You've changed a life." And I can't explain the feeling, except to say, for the first time in years, I felt seen. When the doors of that courthouse opened and the hot Georgia air met my face, it brought with it every ghost I'd carried. Mason stood beside me, hands shoved in his pockets, eyes on the ground like the words might hurt. "I didn't think you'd be here," he said quietly. And I told him the truth. "You were never lost to me, Mason. Not once." He looked up then, and in his face I saw it. Hurt, hope, regret, and something like beginning. I reached into my purse and pulled out the photograph I'd kept all these years. Him at 11, standing in my kitchen, me behind him in an apron dusted with flour. "I fought for you," I told him. "The system doesn't always listen, but I did." He took the photo, held it like it might break, didn't say much. But we didn't need words. Sometimes standing side by side in silence is enough to begin again. 2 years later, I sat in a room strung with fairy lights at a foster care benefit. Soft music playing, people swaying between speeches and memory. Mason stood on stage, sleeves rolled, tattoos showing, eyes steady. "I spent years thinking I was just a mistake waiting to happen," he told the crowd. "But there was a time when I was a kid that one woman made me feel like I belonged." And then he pointed at me. "She's not just my foster mom, she's my mother." And I sat there, heart so full I thought it might burst, not from pride, but from something deeper. That slow, stubborn healing that happens when you love someone long enough for the light to reach the broken places. That night I went home, pulled out that same old photograph and placed it next to a new one. Mason, all grown, smiling, arms slung around my shoulder, both of us standing outside the courthouse where everything changed. You want to know what justice looks like? It's not just a verdict or a gavel striking wood. Sometimes it's love that stays. Sometimes it's the quiet, stubborn decision to keep showing up even when the world forgets you. And I wonder, what do you think? Do you believe in second chances? Or do some wounds run too deep to heal? Tell me, share your story. Let's talk about what justice really is. Not in the law books, but in kitchens that smell like cinnamon, in folded laundry, in hands held through the storm. Sometimes, justice is made, one act of kindness at a time.